There's a moment most beekeepers know. You pull the lid back in early spring. The frames are warm. The cluster is tight but moving. You find the queen. She's laying. Pattern looks reasonable. Maybe a little thin in places, but nothing that sets off any alarms. You close the hive. Colony's fine. 6 weeks later, that hive is a dead box. Not disease. Not starvation. Not a hard winter that held on too long. The bees had already made their decision the morning you stood there telling yourself everything looked good. That's the part nobody talks about much. A queen can be laying. The brood can be present. The colony can look, by every standard inspection checklist, completely functional, and still be 4 to 6 weeks from a collapse the bees quietly decided on, weeks before you ever opened the lid. The name for what the colony does in that window is Supersedure, and it is one of the most misread biological signals in beekeeping. Not because it's rare. It isn't. Not because it's invisible. It leaves marks. But because most inspections are built around a single question: is the queen present and laying? And when the answer is yes, the inspection ends, the hive gets closed, the beekeeper moves on. The bees don't move on. They're still working on the problem. If you've ever lost a colony that seemed stable, queen present, brood visible, population holding, and never quite understood what happened, this is worth staying for. There's a good chance the colony was already past the point of no return before you ever saw anything unusual. If something in your hives has ever felt off without looking wrong, leave it below. I'd like to hear it. The arc d'essai Supersedure is not an emergency response. That distinction matters, and it gets confused constantly. When a queen dies suddenly, laying workers, pesticide exposure, a clumsy inspection, the colony enters what's called an emergency queen situation. Workers construct cells quickly, often from existing young larvae. The behaviour is rapid, in colony terms: multiple cells, bottom bars, no deliberation visible from the outside. The colony reacts because it has no other option. Supersedure is the opposite of that. Or they dal, offered Sandy from Infra. Offered Sandy from Infra, or they dal, fine pellows de war. Supersedure is the opposite of that. Supersedure is a decision made slowly, quietly, over days or weeks, while the existing queen is still alive, still laying, still being fed, still being attended. The colony doesn't appear to be in crisis because, by its own biology, it isn't yet. It's managing one. The difference in the comb is subtle but real. Supersedure cells tend to appear on the face of the frame, not along the bottom bar. Usually one, sometimes 2 or 3. Built with a care that suggests the colony knows exactly what it's doing and isn't in a hurry. The old queen continues laying through much of this process. In some cases, she's still present after the new queen emerges. Both queens on the same frame for a period, workers moving between them. That's a detail that surprises most beekeepers the first time they see it. 2 queens, one laying, one newly emerged, and the colony managing both without what looks, from the outside, like conflict. That's not dysfunction. That's the transition. The bees are not confused. They're executing a plan that the colony reached together. The beekeeper finds the laying queen, sees brood, calls it good, and closes the hive. But the colony has already placed a cell elsewhere on that frame, sometimes 2 frames over, sometimes in the centre of the brood nest, between drawn comb where the inspection rarely lingers. Not on the bottom bar, not where you'd look for a swarm cell, right where the inspection skips. Af disguise of es mars af disguise kais. Waractive for the inspection skips. The colony isn't guessing. Fies and out war, wise and out war. Horless eyes and out war, wise and out war, made eyes and out war, fies and out war, fies and out war, fies and out war, fies and out war. This is something worth understanding at the level it actually happens. Workers don't assess their queen visually. They don't observe her from a distance and draw a conclusion. They're in constant physical contact with her. They feed her, groom her, receive secretions from her, pass those secretions through the colony through a process called trophallaxis, mouth-to-mouth transfer essentially. The queen's chemistry moves through the hive the same way information moves through any well-organized system, continuously, at close range, between individuals who then carry it outward to others. What workers are measuring, among other things, is a compound called 9-hydroxy-2-desonoic acid. It's part of the queen mandibular pheromone complex. The concentration and composition of that signal affects worker behavior directly. It suppresses ovary development in workers. It guides colony activity. It holds the social structure of the hive in a kind of chemical balance. When that signal changes, when the concentration drops or the composition shifts, workers detect it. Not immediately, not in a single inspection cycle, but over time, as more workers move through the retinue and return with different chemical information, the colony builds a consensus. And that consensus, when it tips, produces a supersedure decision. That's not a metaphor. That's the mechanism. Far u cars, far u mechanism. Far u mechanism. Far u mechanism. By the time the colony begins constructing a supersedure cell, that process of detection and consensus has been running for some time. Days at minimum, possibly weeks. The construction of the cell is not the beginning of supersedure. It's closer to the end of the decision-making process, which means when a beekeeper finds a supersedure cell, the colony is already deep into a transition the beekeeper never saw beginning. Most beekeepers find the cell and assume something just happened, something sudden, something they can still walk back. In most cases, what they're looking at is the colony's answer to a problem it's been working on quietly for longer than the inspection record shows. The question was asked weeks ago. There's a version of this that almost every experienced beekeeper has lived through, even if they didn't name it at the time. You open a hive in May. The queen is there. You spot her after a minute or two, moving in that deliberate way a healthy queen moves. The brood pattern looks functional. Not exceptional, but not alarming. You see capped cells, open cells, a little scattered pattern along the edges, but nothing that raises a flag. Population feels reasonable. You close it down. That hive gets less attention for the next 3 weeks, because it looked fine. Then you open it again, and the population is half what it was. The brood is reduced. There's still a queen, but she's not the same queen. And somewhere in the window you didn't inspect, the colony executed a succession. The new queen is 2 weeks behind on production, and the colony is paying for that gap with its spring population count. The nectar flow started without them. Nothing feels monthanen. That gap, the stretch of time between when a supersedure cell is capped and when a new queen is mated and laying, is a brood break. 3 to 4 weeks in most conditions, assuming the weather holds for mating flights. During a nectar flow, that's not a recoverable loss. The bees that should have been born to cap the honey frames weren't born yet. The bees flying during that window were older workers, shorter lifespan, declining wax production, less efficient in every respect. By the time the new queen reaches full production, the colony's carrying capacity for a honey crop is already compromised. A colony can survive supersedure and still lose an entire season's production to it. That's the cost. No dead out to point to. No single moment of failure. Just a colony that underperformed for reasons that look, from the outside, like weather, or forage, or a slow year. The colony had a different explanation. It expressed it clearly in the only language it has. The inspection just didn't translate it. In the field, the difference matters, because what you do next depends entirely on which one you're looking at. And the colony's situation is not the same in any 2 cases. Emergency queen cells are often irregular in placement. Multiple cells, frequently built from larvae that were already developing in worker cells, the colony converts them rapidly. Construction is fast. The cells can have a slightly rougher look, though not always. That depends on timing and the strength of the colony at the moment. What identifies an emergency situation more reliably than the cells themselves is what surrounds them. A disrupted brood pattern, a restlessness in the colony movement, a particular quality to the hive sound, harder to describe than to recognize, that experienced beekeepers associate with queenlessness. The bees move differently when no queen pheromone is present. The hive has a different feel. Swarm cells have their own signature. Typically along the bottom bars, pendant. Multiple cells, often in clusters across several frames. Built during colony expansion, when population pressure and the approaching nectar flow push the colony toward reproductive swarming. The queen is usually still present, laying well. The colony population is often near its peak. Everything looks vigorous. That's the point. A colony swarms from strength, not weakness. Supersedure cells sit on the face of the comb, mid-frame, sometimes clustered near the center of the brood nest, usually 1 to 3 cells. The existing queen is present and laying. The colony population is often normal, sometimes slightly reduced. The brood pattern may show early signs of irregularity. Not dramatic, but present if you're comparing it to what it looked like 3 weeks ago. 1 cell, mid-frame, queen still laying, brood pattern slightly off from what you remember. That's a picture worth pausing on. The mistake most beekeepers make is seeing that cell and reaching for an action. Either they remove it, assuming it's a problem to be managed, or they assume the colony is planning to swarm and respond accordingly. Neither response addresses what the colony is actually doing. Removing a supersedure cell from a colony that needs to replace a failing queen doesn't fix the queen. It delays the colony's solution while the queen continues to decline. The colony tries again. It usually does. But the season doesn't wait. What makes Supersedure difficult to work with is the timeline it operates on. The colony doesn't begin constructing a cell the day the queen starts declining. There's a detection period first. Workers in the queen's retinue, the bees that feed and attend her most closely, are the first to register the change in her pheromone output. But a single worker's assessment doesn't drive a colony response. The information has to propagate. It moves through trophallaxis, through the retinue, through returning foragers who encounter nestmates carrying different chemical information. The colony builds a consensus slowly, the way any distributed system reaches agreement, through accumulated signal, not a single decision point. Once that consensus tips, cell construction begins. A supersedure cell takes roughly 16 days to produce a virgin queen from the time the egg is laid. Add another 10 to 14 days for mating flights and the queen's orientation period, assuming weather cooperates. Then another 3 to 5 days before she begins laying in earnest. From the time the colony begins building the cell to the time a new queen is producing viable brood, in reasonable conditions, you're looking at 30 to 35 days. That's the brood break. A 5 safer for consists hat saves from a hats. Bust the brood break. During that window, no new workers are entering the population from the old queen's eggs. The workers present are aging. Foragers have the shortest adult lifespans of any caste in the colony during active season, roughly 3 to 6 weeks. The colony's replacement rate falls behind its mortality rate. Population drops. If that window overlaps with the primary nectar flow in your area, the math becomes very clear. The colony doesn't have enough foragers at the right age to cap what's coming in. Honey stores exist, but they're not what they could have been. The colony survives, but the season is largely lost. This is what older beekeepers meant when they said a colony had bad timing. Not that the beekeeper did anything obviously wrong, but that the biological clock inside that hive had slipped out of phase with the agricultural calendar outside it. Reading Supersedure early enough to matter, that's the skill. And it starts before any cell appears. The cell is not the first sign. It's easy to think it is because it's the first visible thing, but the colony was already at work before any construction began. The beekeeper who waits for the cell has already missed the early window. There are earlier signals, not dramatic ones, not the kind that announce themselves on a standard inspection checklist. The queen's retinue changes first. Under a healthy, fully productive queen, the workers attending her are consistently attentive, grooming, feeding, turning toward her. The cluster around her has a quality to it that's hard to put into precise words but recognizable once you've watched enough queens. With a queen whose pheromone output is declining, that retinue shifts. Fewer attendants, less consistent orientation toward her, workers moving past her with less engagement than the behavior of a healthy colony produces. You have to be watching for it, specifically. Most inspections aren't watching for it. The brood pattern tells you something only if you read it over time, not in a single snapshot. A queen in gradual decline shows you the trend across 3 or 4 inspections. Slightly more skipped cells than the previous visit, slightly less uniformity in the spacing of capped brood. Nothing alarming in isolation. A pattern over time. The queen's laying geometry also changes in ways a careful eye catches. A strong queen lays in expanding arcs across the comb face. The pattern has an internal logic, concentric, organized, the brood moving outward from the center of the frame as the season progresses. A queen in the early stages of decline begins to lose some of that geometry. Gaps appear not randomly but in ways that suggest she's navigating the frame less efficiently than before, and the queen herself, physically, her movement across the frame. A young, productive queen moves with a particular deliberateness, not rushed, but purposeful. An aging or declining queen sometimes moves differently. Slower transitions between cells, a hesitation in the way she positions to lay that wasn't there before. None of these things alone is a diagnosis. Together, across multiple inspections, they form a picture. Old-time beekeepers, the ones who ran 40 hives through hard seasons without the option of ordering a replacement queen by Friday, learn to read that picture, not from reading about it, from watching. Here's what it actually comes down to. That as Paul of Mise, the colony doesn't wait for a queen to fail completely. That's the misunderstanding at the center of almost every misread Supersedure. Beekeepers are trained to look for failure. A queenless hive, a drone-laying queen, a collapsed brood pattern. Those are endpoints. The colony doesn't manage endpoints, it manages trajectories. Workers in close contact with the queen aren't waiting to see if she fails, they're measuring the direction of her pheromone output over time. A queen whose mandibular pheromone complex is gradually declining, even if she's still laying adequately today, triggers a Supersedure response not because she's failing now, but because the colony's biology projects where she's heading. That's the verdict. Not this queen has failed. The verdict is, this queen is declining, and the rate of decline puts her below productive threshold before the colony can afford it. The bees work from a biological projection, not a present-day assessment, and they're not wrong. Queens in Supersedure studies show measurable pheromone decline well before any visible reduction in laying performance. The workers detect it before the beekeeper can see anything wrong at all. The cell that appears on the midframe isn't the colony raising an alarm, it's the colony announcing a solution it already worked through, which means the window for a beekeeper to make a meaningful decision, to support the Supersedure, to provide bridge resources, to understand what the colony is about to cost itself in timing, opens before any visible sign of the process, and it closes long before that cell is capped. By the time you find that mid-frame queen cell with a laying queen still present, the colony has already done most of the biological work of the decision. The queen has already been assessed. The consensus has already run. The cell is the colony's announcement, not its question. This is exactly why the standard rule, find the queen, confirm she's laying, close the hive, fails specifically in Supersedure situations. It catches the present moment and calls it the whole story. The colony is not living in the present moment. It's managing a timeline that started weeks ago and runs weeks into the future. The present moment is just where the beekeeper visits. The beekeeping literature from the early part of the last century treated Supersedure as a natural colony process to be understood and managed, not reversed. Langstroth described it. The Root publications documented it carefully. Beekeepers running apiaries of 30 and 40 colonies without modern supply chains had to understand colony succession because they couldn't afford not to. A supersedure missed meant a production year compromised, and in an era when beekeeping was a working part of a farm economy, production years were not abstract. What those beekeepers built, over generations of observation, was a reading practice, not a checklist, a practice. They knew which colonies in their yard were likely to attempt natural queen replacement based on the queen's age and the behaviour of the colony through the previous season. They knew what a hive looked like in the weeks before a supersedure cell appeared. They tracked the retinue changes, the brood pattern changes. Some of the older accounts describe beekeepers who could walk an apiary and identify, without opening a single hive, which colonies were in a biological transition, reading entrance behaviour, flight pattern, even listening to the hive sound against the wood. That knowledge passed down in yards, not books, taught by standing next to someone who had 30 years on you. When commercial queen rearing expanded through the middle of the 20th century and replacement queens became accessible by mail or from local breeders, that tradition of reading natural colony succession began to fade. If you could order a new queen and install her by the weekend, the need to detect the early signals diminished. The skill wasn't lost in a single season, it eroded over decades, replaced by a management model that treated queen events as problems with vendor solutions. The knowledge didn't disappear, it's still in the older literature. It's still practiced by beekeepers who run natural management systems, or who for whatever reason rely on the colony's own biology rather than outside inputs. But for the majority of beekeepers trained in the last 40 years, supersedure is something that happens, not something you see coming. If this kind of deep colony biology is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribing keeps it coming. This is the territory the channel covers. So what do you actually do? First, don't remove the cell. This is the intervention that costs the most colonies the most quietly. A beekeeper finds a mid-frame queen cell with the existing queen still laying, decides it's an unwanted situation, removes the cell, and considers the problem solved. The colony disagrees. Within days, another cell appears. Or two. The colony knows what the inspection didn't show, that the queen's pheromone output is declining, that the succession it started was necessary. Removing the cell doesn't reverse the queen's trajectory. It delays the colony's management of it. Second, verify what you're actually looking at before you do anything. One cell, mid-frame, queen present, brood pattern mildly irregular, population stable but not expanding. That's a supersedure picture. Multiple cells along the bottom bar, expanding population, nectar flow approaching. That's swarm preparation. These situations look superficially similar to an inspection that isn't reading all of the details. They require entirely different responses. Treating one like the other costs you either a swarm or a failed intervention. Third, if it is supersedure, assess where you are in the season. If there are 4 to 6 weeks before your primary nectar flow, the colony may complete the transition in time to partially recover. The brood break will cost something, but with a strong flow and a successfully mated new queen, the colony can stabilise and produce a partial crop. If the supersedure is beginning at or during the nectar flow, the calculation changes. At that point, a spare frame of capped brood from a stronger colony, transferred carefully to offset the ageing worker population, can bridge the gap without disrupting the succession the colony has already started. It's not a reversal, it's support. The colony's biological decision stays intact. The beekeeper reduces the cost of the timing. The colony is doing the right thing for its own survival. The beekeeper's job in that moment is not to override the decision. It's to understand what the decision costs in timing and find a way to reduce that cost without breaking the biology that's already running. That's a different kind of intervention than most beekeepers are trained to make. The wrong moves in a supersedure situation tend to follow a pattern, and recognizing that pattern is as useful as knowing the right ones. The first wrong move is treating the cell as an emergency. Beekeepers are often trained to act when they find queen cells, to requeen, to split, to intervene decisively. That instinct serves well during swarm preparation. It works against you in Supersedure. The colony's biology is running a managed transition, not a crisis. Introducing urgency into a situation the colony is handling deliberately creates disruption the biology doesn't need, and the beekeeper doesn't benefit from. The second wrong move is installing a purchased replacement queen during active Supersedure. This seems logical at first consideration. Colony is struggling with queen quality. Introduce a better queen. Problem solved. But a colony in Supersedure has made a chemical assessment of its situation and acted on it. Its acceptance of any newly introduced queen depends on pheromone match, introduction timing, and the colony's current state of queen-related awareness. Colonies in active Supersedure have heightened sensitivity to queen chemistry. Introduction failures are more common in this window than most beekeepers account for. The colony may already have a capped cell on a frame. From the colony's perspective, two candidates are being introduced simultaneously, the purchased queen and the one it's already raising. That conflict rarely resolves the way the beekeeper intended. The third wrong move, and perhaps the most common because it doesn't announce itself as a mistake, is simply not noticing at all. Closing the hive after confirming the queen is present, missing everything else, and moving to the next box. The hive underperforms later. The population drops without a clear cause. The honey yield is lower than the season warranted. The beekeeper attributes it to forage, or weather, or a slow year. The colony had a different explanation. It expressed that explanation clearly in the only medium it has. The inspection just never learnt to read it. The sast inspekingen ging på read it. Most mistakes in this territory aren't errors of action, they're errors of reading. The beekeeper did something wrong only in the sense that they read a situation as simple that was complicated. The hive looked fine, the checklist came back clean, and everything underneath the checklist was already in motion. A colony can hold a queen long after the biology has started moving on from her. That's what makes Supersedure so easy to miss. The hive doesn't look wrong when it begins. The queen is present, the brood is present. Everything the checklist asks for is there. But underneath the surface of the inspection, the colony is already running its own assessment, chemical, social, continuous. And it has reached a conclusion the beekeeper hasn't been given yet. The bees aren't wrong when they start that process. They almost never are. The organisms doing the assessment are in direct, constant physical contact with the queen in question. They have more information than any inspection will ever produce. What beekeeping loses, what it has been losing since the practice became more about management tools and less about observation time, is the ability to receive that information, not as data from a checklist, as behaviour, as pattern, as the slow accumulation of what a colony looks like when it's healthy versus when it's quietly managing something the beekeeper hasn't been told about yet. The old-timers walked their yards with that knowledge. It doesn't come in a single season, but it starts with one shift. When you open a hive and everything looks fine, ask one more question. Not is the queen present? Not is she laying? Ask whether the colony agrees. The answer is in the retinue, in the brood geometry, in the placement and number of queen cells, in the sound and movement of the cluster around her. The colony has been answering that question continuously, long before you arrived with your smoker and your hive tool. If you've worked through a Supersedure situation, managed it, misread it, lost something to it, or caught it in time, share it in the comments. That kind of accumulated field knowledge is worth more than most of what gets written down, and if something here was useful, a like helps other beekeepers find it. There's a related piece worth spending time on. What Supersedure in the first year of a newly installed package or nucleus tells you, and why it's almost always misread as a failure of the colony when it's something else entirely. That one warrants its own time.